I should have known something was wrong when they hired me on the spot. No background check delays, no second interview, just a handshake and a start date. But when you are 24 years old with student debt crushing your shoulders and rent due in a week, you do not ask too many questions. You just smile, sign the papers, and thank whatever force in the universe decided to throw you a lifeline. That lifeline came in the form of Northbound Airways, a small regional carrier I had never heard of, operating red-eye flights along the Pacific Northwest. The pay was almost double what other airlines offered for flight attendants, and they promised flexible schedules. It seemed too good to be true. It was. My name is Henry, and I'm about to tell you something that will make you think twice before boarding a late-night flight. This is not a story about turbulence or rude passengers. This is about the rules they gave me on my first day. Rules that made no sense until I broke one of them. If you have ever wondered why flight crews sometimes look nervous on overnight flights, or why certain seats remain empty even on fully booked planes, keep watching. And if you find this story disturbing, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe, because you are going to want to hear how this ends. Trust me, you will not see it coming. Share this with someone who loves a good scare, or better yet, someone who flies often. They deserve to know. The Northbound Airways training facility sat in a forgotten corner of SeaTac, tucked between abandoned hangars that looked like they had not seen maintenance since the Cold War. The building itself was a relic, all cracked, concrete and flickering fluorescent lights that hummed like angry wasps. I arrived on a Monday morning in late September, the kind of gray Seattle day where the sky and the pavement blur into one depressing shade of nothing. There were 5 of us in the training group. A woman named Claire who had flown for Delta before some incident she would not talk about. 2 college kids, Brad and Ashley, who seemed way too excited about the whole thing. And a quiet guy named Tom who kept to himself and took notes on everything. Our instructor was a woman in her 50s who introduced herself simply as Ms. Werner. She had the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile, all sharp angles and tired eyes that had seen things she would rather forget. "Welcome to Northbound Airways," she said, her voice flat and rehearsed. "You have been selected for our specialized flight crew program. The routes you will be working are unique. They require discretion, attention to detail, and above all, the ability to follow instructions without question." She passed out thick binders, the kind with metal rings that clicked ominously when you opened them. The cover was plain black with the Northbound logo embossed in fading silver. Inside, the first page was titled, "Operational Guidelines for Night Crew Personnel." What followed was the standard stuff at first: safety procedures, emergency protocols, customer service expectations. But then I reached page 47. Rules for Overnight Flight Operations, the header read. Below it, 8 numbered rules in bold red text. Rule 1. Never open the cargo hold door between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. no matter what sounds you hear from inside. I read it 3 times. Then I glanced up at Ms. Werner, expecting some kind of explanation or maybe a smirk that would indicate this was some kind of hazing ritual for new hires. Her expression had not changed. "These rules," she said, noticing several of us staring at the page, "are non-negotiable. They are not suggestions, they are not guidelines, they are absolute requirements for your safety and the safety of the passengers. You will memorize them, you will follow them, and you will not discuss them with anyone outside this company." Claire raised her hand. "What kind of sounds are we talking about?" Ms. Werner's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The kind you ignore." That should have been my first red flag. It should have been the moment I stood up, walked out, and went back to applying at coffee shops and retail stores. But I thought about my bank account. I thought about the eviction notice I had narrowly avoided the month before. I thought about the $4,200 they were offering every 2 weeks. So I stayed in my seat, and I read the rest of the rules. Rule 2. If you see a passenger in seat 13F after the final head count, do not acknowledge them. Proceed as if the seat is empty. Rule 3. The lavatory in the rear of the aircraft must remain locked during overnight flights. If you find it unlocked, lock it immediately and do not look inside. Rule 4. If the intercom system activates on its own and you hear breathing, respond with, "Thank you for flying with us," and nothing else. Rule 5. During red-eye flights, if all passengers appear to be asleep simultaneously, check your watch. If it has stopped, remain seated until it starts again. Rule 6. Never serve drinks to anyone in row 7 after midnight. If they request service, politely tell them refreshments will resume at dawn. Rule 7. If you notice frost forming on the cabin windows while flying over the ocean, close all window shades immediately and do not allow passengers to open them until sunrise. Rule 8. Should you hear knocking from beneath the galley floor, place a cup of water on the floor and walk away. Do not investigate the source. I sat there staring at these rules, my mind trying to process them like a computer struggling with corrupted data. Around me, my fellow trainees wore similar expressions of confusion and unease. Only Tom seemed, unsurprised, nodding slowly as he read each rule, like they confirmed something he had already suspected. I know these seem unusual, Ms. Werner continued, and I almost laughed at the understatement. But they exist for a reason. Northbound Airways operates routes that other carriers have abandoned. We fly when others will not. We go where others refuse. This comes with certain complications. Follow these rules exactly and you will have a long and profitable career with us. Ignore them and... She paused, and for the first time I saw something flicker in those dead eyes. Fear, maybe. Or memory. Well, let us just say the company has excellent life insurance policies. The training continued for 2 more weeks, but that first day cast a shadow over everything that followed. We learned the usual things: how to demonstrate oxygen masks, how to evacuate an aircraft, how to handle medical emergencies at 30,000 feet. But woven through all of it were those 8 rules, repeated until they became a rhythm in my head. A dark prayer I could recite in my sleep. Ms. Werner drilled them into us with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She would call on us randomly throughout the day. Henry, Rule 4. And I would have to recite it perfectly, word for word. Any hesitation, any mistake, and we would start over. Claire cracked on the 3rd day, breaking down in tears and demanding to know what the hell we were really being trained for. Ms. Werner just watched her cry, waited for the silence to return, and continued the lesson. On the final day of training, Ms. Werner kept us after the others had left. The 5 of us sat in that fluorescent-lit classroom as the sun set outside, painting the clouds in shades of orange and red that looked too much like fire. You start your first flights tomorrow, she said. Different routes, different aircraft, but all overnight shifts. Some of you will quit after your first flight. Some of you will last longer. A few of you might even make it a year. She looked at each of us in turn, her gaze lingering on me for a moment longer than the others. When you see something you cannot explain, remember the rules. When you hear something that makes your blood run cold, remember the rules. When every instinct in your body screams at you to run, to investigate, to help, remember the rules. They are the only thing keeping you alive up there. Tom raised his hand, the first time he had spoken in 2 weeks. What happens if we break one? Ms. Werner was quiet for a long moment. Then she walked to a filing cabinet in the corner and pulled out a folder. She opened it on the desk in front of us. Inside were photos. Personnel files, I realized. Flight attendants, pilots, ground crew. Each photo had a red stamp across it. Some said missing, others said deceased. A few just said do not discuss. These people broke the rules, she said simply. Learn from their mistakes. That night I did not sleep. I lay in my apartment staring at the ceiling, the 8 rules running through my mind on an endless loop. I told myself I could quit. I told myself no job was worth whatever nightmare I had just signed up for. But then I looked at my phone, at the email confirming my first paycheck would be deposited at the end of the week. $2,100, half of what I would make in a month, for 2 weeks of work. I got up, made coffee, and prepared my uniform. The next night I would board Flight 417 from Seattle to Anchorage, a red-eye departure at 11:47 p.m. I would wear my pressed black uniform with the silver wings pinned over my heart. I would smile at passengers, stow their luggage, and demonstrate safety procedures I prayed we would never need. And I would follow the rules, every single one of them. Because whatever was waiting for me at 35,000 feet, I had a feeling it was much worse than student debt or eviction notices. It was worse than anything I could imagine. I was right about that. I was right about all of it. My first flight was scheduled to depart from Gate C-17, one of the older gates in a section of the terminal that seemed perpetually under dim lighting. I arrived 2 hours early, as instructed, and found the crew briefing room. The captain was a man in his 50s named Patterson, with silver hair and the kind of calm demeanor that comes from either decades of experience or complete resignation to fate. The co-pilot, Davis, was younger, maybe early 30s, and had the nervous energy of someone who had not been flying these routes long enough to become numb to them. The other flight attendant was a woman named Rita. She was in her 40s with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that reminded me of Ms. Werner's. Tired, knowing, haunted. When I introduced myself, she looked me up and down like she was measuring me for a coffin. "First night flight?" she asked. "Yes," she nodded slowly. "You memorized the rules?" "Every word." "Good. You are going to need them." She turned away, checking her equipment with practiced efficiency. "Stick close to me tonight. Do not wander. Do not volunteer for anything. And for God's sake, if you see something strange, do not investigate. Just tell me and we will handle it together." Captain Patterson cleared his throat. "Flight 417 is a standard run. Seattle to Anchorage, 5 hours, minimal turbulence expected. We have 32 passengers booked. Mostly business travelers and a few tourists trying to save money on airfare by flying overnight." He paused, exchanging a glance with Davis. "It is a quiet route. Keep it that way." The weight of everything unsaid hung in the air like smoke. I wanted to ask questions. I wanted to demand explanations. But I remembered Ms. Werner's words about following instructions without question, so I just nodded and followed Rita out to the aircraft. The plane was a Boeing 737 older model, with the kind of worn interior that spoke of thousands of flights and minimal upkeep. As I walked through the cabin doing my pre-flight check, I noticed certain details. Seat 13F had a piece of black tape over the number, so worn it was barely visible. The lavatory at the rear of the plane had a metal bolt lock on the outside, industrial and out of place among the standard aircraft fixtures. And Row 7 had seats that looked newer than the rest, like they had been replaced recently. The upholstery was a slightly different shade of blue. "Do not stare," Rita said quietly, appearing beside me. "It draws attention." "Attention from who?" I asked. "The passengers are not even boarding yet." She gave me a look that made my stomach drop. "Exactly. Boarding began at 11:15 p.m. The passengers trickled in with the glazed expressions of people resigned to an uncomfortable night in a metal tube. Business travelers in wrinkled suits, their laptops clutched like security blankets. A young couple holding hands, probably trying to save money on their vacation. An elderly woman traveling alone, who smiled at me warmly as I helped her with her carry-on. I counted them as they entered. 32 passengers, just as Captain Patterson had said. I did a final head count after everyone was seated and confirmed the number again. 32. The number was important. I did not know why yet, but I felt it in my bones. We pushed back from the gate at 11:43 p.m., 4 minutes ahead of schedule. I went through the safety demonstration on autopilot, my mind hyper-aware of every shadow in the cabin, every small sound. The passengers barely paid attention, most of them already trying to sleep with neck pillows and eye masks. As we taxied toward the runway, Rita leaned close to me. "Remember Rule 5, she whispered. "If they all go to sleep at the same time, check your watch immediately. Do not waste a second. What happens if my watch stops? You sit down, you stay calm, and you wait. It usually only lasts a few minutes, but those minutes will feel like hours. Whatever you do, do not try to wake anyone up. Do not touch them. Just wait." The plane accelerated, the engines roaring, and then we were airborne, climbing into the darkness above Seattle. The city lights fell away below us, replaced by the vast emptiness of the Pacific Northwest night. I watched through the window as we rose above the clouds, into a sky so full of stars it looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. For the first hour, everything was normal, almost disappointingly so. I served drinks to the few passengers still awake. Rita and I did our rounds, checking on people, offering blankets and pillows. Captain Patterson's voice came over the intercom with standard updates about altitude and estimated arrival time. But then we crossed into 1 a.m., and I felt the atmosphere in the cabin change. It was subtle at first. The temperature seemed to drop a few degrees, enough that I noticed passengers pulling their blankets tighter. The engine noise, which had been a constant white noise background, seemed to develop an odd rhythm, almost like breathing, and the shadows in the cabin grew deeper, pooling in the corners and under the seats in ways that did not quite match the overhead lighting. I was in the galley preparing coffee when I heard it. A sound from below, from beneath the metal floor panels. Knock, knock, knock. 3 slow, deliberate impacts, like someone rapping their knuckles against the underside of the aircraft. Rule 8 flooded my mind. Should you hear knocking from beneath the galley floor, place a cup of water on the floor and walk away. Do not investigate the source. My hands trembled as I filled a plastic cup with water. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Knock, knock, knock. I placed the cup on the floor, exactly in the center of the galley, and stepped back. The knocking stopped immediately. I watched the cup, hardly breathing. The water inside began to ripple, concentric circles spreading from the center like something was creating vibrations below. Then slowly, impossibly, the water level began to drop. Not spilling, not evaporating, just decreasing like something beneath the floor was drinking it. When the cup was empty, the ripples stopped. I picked it up with shaking hands and threw it in the trash, forcing myself to turn away to not think about what had just happened. Rita found me a moment later. She took one look at my face and nodded.
Rule 8?
Yes, good, you followed it. That is all that matters. She squeezed my shoulder. It gets easier, sort of. But it did not get easier, because at 2:15 a.m., as we flew over the dark waters off the coast of Washington, I heard a different sound. A mechanical grinding followed by a series of loud thumps. They were coming from the cargo hold. Rule 1. Never open the cargo hold door between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., no matter what sounds you hear from inside. The thumping continued, rhythmic and insistent. Boom, boom, boom. Like something large moving around down there, shifting cargo, or trying to get out. I looked at Rita and she was already shaking her head. Do not even think about it, she said. But what if something is wrong? What if cargo shifted and it is a safety issue? It is not a safety issue. And even if it were, we do not open that door. Not until 4:01 a.m. at the earliest. The thumping grew louder. Other passengers were starting to stir, looking around with confused expressions. One man, a business traveler in row 9, pressed his call button. Rita plastered on her professional smile and went to him. Is everything all right? He asked. What is that noise? Just some minor mechanical adjustments, sir. Nothing to worry about. Would you like another drink? She distracted him with small talk and a gin and tonic, her voice never wavering, her smile never faltering. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes kept darting toward the cargo hold access panel. The thumping continued for 20 minutes. Then just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. I stood in the galley, every muscle tense, waiting for something else to happen. At 2:47 a.m., I did my rounds through the cabin, checking on passengers. Most were asleep now or trying to be. The cabin lights were dimmed to their lowest setting, creating a twilight atmosphere where everything looked slightly unreal. I was halfway down the aisle when I noticed it. Seat 13F. According to my manifest, it was empty. I had counted 32 passengers and seat 13F had been vacant during boarding. But now someone was sitting there. Rule 2. If you see a passenger in seat 13F after the final head count, do not acknowledge them. Proceed as if the seat is empty. I forced myself to keep walking, my eyes fixed straight ahead. But in my peripheral vision, I could see them. A figure in the window seat, perfectly still, facing away from me toward the window. They wore dark clothing and their hair was long and black, hanging down past their shoulders. I could not see their face. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to ask if they needed anything, to question how they had appeared in a seat that had been empty just minutes ago. But I remembered Ms. Werner's words. I remembered those photos of missing crew members. So I kept walking, past row 13, past the figure that should not exist, pretending I saw nothing. When I reached the back of the cabin, my hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the galley counter to steady myself. Rita was there, and one look at my face told her everything. True, she asked quietly. I nodded. You did not acknowledge them? No. Good. She glanced down the aisle, her expression grim. They will be there for a while. Maybe the rest of the flight. Just ignore them. Whatever you do, do not make eye contact. Do not speak to them. Do not let any passengers near that row if you can help it. What are they? I whispered. Rita was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, a passenger. From another flight. One that did not land. The implications of that statement hit me like a physical blow. I wanted to ask more, needed to understand, but Rita turned away and began preparing for the next service round. The message was clear. Some questions do not have answers you want to hear. At 3 a.m. exactly, I checked my watch out of habit. Then I looked up at the cabin and my blood turned to ice. Every single passenger was asleep. All 32 of them, plus the impossible figure in 13F. Their heads were all tilted at the same angle. Their breathing synchronized in a way that was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Rule 5. During red-eye flights, if all passengers appear to be asleep simultaneously, check your watch. If it has stopped, remain seated until it starts again. I looked at my watch again. The second hand had frozen in place. 4:17. The numbers glowed in the dim cabin light, mocking me with their stillness. Rita, I called softly. She was in the forward galley. Rita. She appeared in the aisle, took one look at the sleeping passengers and grabbed my arm. Your watch? Stopped. Mine too. Her grip tightened. Sit down. Now. We sat in the jump seats at the rear of the cabin. The plane continued its steady flight, engines humming, but everything else had gone eerily still. The air felt thick, like trying to breathe underwater. The temperature dropped further, and I could see my breath misting in front of my face. Then I noticed the passengers were not just sleeping. They were not breathing. 32 people sitting upright in their seats, perfectly still, chests not rising or falling. The only movement in the entire cabin was me and Rita, and the figure in 13F, whose shoulders I now realized were moving slightly, like they were laughing silently at some private joke. Do not look at them, Rita hissed, grabbing my chin and turning my face away from 13F. Look at your watch, only your watch. I stared at the frozen second hand, willing it to move, praying for time to restart. Seconds crawled by, each one lasting an eternity. My heart hammered in my chest so hard I thought it might burst. The cabin lights flickered once, twice, and in those brief moments of darkness I saw things moving in the aisle, shapes that were not quite human, drifting between the seats like smoke. How long we sat there I cannot say. It felt like hours, but it might have been minutes. Time had lost all meaning in that frozen moment between seconds. But eventually I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the soft tick of my watch starting again. I looked down. 1:18. The second hand was moving. I glanced up at the cabin and saw the passengers beginning to stir, their chests rising and falling in normal, non-synchronized breathing patterns. The shapes in the aisle were gone. The temperature began to rise back to normal. Rita let out a shaky breath beside me. 4 minutes, she said, looking at her watch. That is not bad. I have had it last 15 once. I could not speak. My throat was too tight, my mind trying to process what I had just experienced. Rita seemed to understand. She stood, smoothed her uniform, and gave me a moment to collect myself. First time is always the hardest, she said. But you did well. You followed the rules. That is all that matters. I wanted to quit right then. I wanted to walk into the cockpit and demand Captain Patterson turn the plane around. I wanted to be anywhere else, doing anything else, even if it meant living in my car and eating ramen for every meal. But we were 3 hours into a 5-hour flight, somewhere over British Columbia, and there was nowhere to go but forward. So I stood up, straightened my own uniform, and continued the flight. At 3:30 a.m. I was doing a final check of the cabin when I noticed the rear lavatory door was ajar. Rule 3 flooded my mind like ice water. The lavatory in the rear of the aircraft must remain locked during overnight flights. If you find it unlocked, lock it immediately and do not look inside. But I was already looking. The door was open just a crack, maybe an inch, and through that gap I could see something that made my breath catch. The inside of the lavatory was covered in frost. Thick white ice crystals coating every surface. The mirror completely opaque with frozen condensation. And there was something else. A handprint on the mirror, as if someone had pressed their palm against it from the inside, trying to get out. I reached for the door to close it, my hand trembling. Just before I pulled it shut, I heard it. A whisper so faint I almost convinced myself I imagined it, but I knew I did not. Help me. I slammed the door shut and threw the bolt lock, my heart racing. Rule 3 had not said anything about what to do if you heard something. Just do not look inside. But I had looked, I had seen, and I had heard. For the rest of the flight, I stood as far from that lavatory as possible. Passengers asked to use it, and I directed them to the one in the front of the cabin, making up excuses about maintenance issues. The lock held. Whatever was inside stayed inside. The flight landed in Anchorage at 4:52 a.m., just as the first hints of dawn were coloring the eastern sky. The passengers deplaned with the usual mix of grogginess and relief, complaining about stiff necks and bad coffee. None of them seemed to remember the synchronized sleeping. None of them mentioned the sounds from the cargo hold or the temperature drops. And when I checked seat 13F during the final walkthrough, it was empty. Just a seat like any other. The black tape over the number, the only sign that it was anything special. Rita and I did not speak as we gathered our things and prepared to leave the aircraft. Captain Patterson and Davis were already in the cockpit filling out paperwork. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. We had survived. It was only as we walked through the empty Anchorage terminal, our footsteps echoing in the pre-dawn quiet, that Rita finally spoke. "You did well tonight, Henry. Better than most on their first flight." She paused at the crew lounge door. "But I should tell you something. Something Miss Werner did not mention in training." "What?" She looked at me with those haunted eyes, and I saw something there I had not seen before. Pity. "The rules keep you safe. They keep you alive. But they do not keep you whole." She touched her temple. "Every flight, you leave a little piece of yourself up there. Every time you ignore something that should not be ignored. Every time you walk past something that needs help. Every time you follow a rule that violates every human instinct you have. It changes you. In 5 years, you will be like me. In 10, you will be like Ms. Werner, and if you make it 20... She shook her head. "Well, I have never met anyone who lasted 20 years. She walked into the lounge, leaving me standing alone in the terminal. The sun was rising outside the windows, painting the snow-capped mountains in shades of pink and gold. It was beautiful. It was normal. It was everything that the last 5 hours had not been. I should have quit then. I should have called Ms. Werner, turned in my wings, and walked away. But I thought about the $2,100 waiting in my bank account. I thought about my bills, my debts, my responsibilities. I thought about how most people spend their whole lives doing jobs they hate, suffering through things they do not understand, all for a paycheck. Maybe this was not so different. Maybe everyone had their own set of rules, their own nightmares to ignore, their own impossible things they pretended not to see. At least I was getting paid well for it. So I went to the hotel, slept fitfully through the day, and reported for the return flight that night, and the night after that, and the night after that. And every single flight, I followed the rules. Every single rule. Because I had seen what happens when you do not. But here is the thing about rules. Eventually, inevitably, you break one. It might be on purpose. It might be an accident. But it happens to everyone who flies these routes long enough. It happened to me on my 15th flight. Flight 417 again, Seattle to Anchorage. The route I had flown more than any other. I knew every creak of that aircraft, every quirk, every shadow. I had become almost comfortable with the strangeness, the way you become comfortable with chronic pain. You never stop feeling it, but you learn to function around it. Rita was my partner again. We had developed a rhythm, a silent understanding born of shared trauma. We did not talk about the flights during our days off. We did not acknowledge each other if we passed in public. The job existed in its own separate reality, disconnected from everything else. It was 3:45 a.m. and we were 45 minutes from landing. I was in the rear galley when I heard it. A sound that made my blood run cold because it was not supposed to happen. Not on this flight. Not on any flight. The intercom clicked on. Static hissed through the speakers. And then breathing. Slow, deliberate breaths in and out, in and out. Rule 4. If the intercom system activates on its own and you hear breathing, respond with, "Thank you for flying with us," and nothing else. I grabbed the intercom handset, my hand steady despite my racing heart. This was a rule I knew. A rule I had practiced. I pressed the button and opened my mouth to deliver the required response. But before I could speak, I heard something else. A voice, faint and distant, coming through the static. "Henry, help me, please, I am still here." "I am still in the voice cut off with a burst of static. My finger was frozen on the intercom button. That voice. I knew that voice. It was mine. My own voice, pleading for help coming through the intercom from somewhere inside the aircraft, or from some other version of this flight that had not ended well. I should have said the words, "Thank you for flying with us." 3 seconds, 4 words, and the rule would be satisfied. But I could not. I could not respond to my own voice begging for help with a corporate pleasantry. It was too much. Too wrong. "Hello?" I said instead. Where are you?" The breathing stopped. The static cut out. The intercom went dead with a click that sounded almost like a door slamming shut. And in that moment, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. Rita appeared in the galley doorway, her face pale. "Please tell me you did not just break Rule 4. I could not answer. I was staring at the intercom handset like it was a live snake. "Henry," her voice was sharp now, urgent. "Please tell me you said the right words." I heard my voice. It was me. I was asking for help. Rita closed her eyes. "Oh God, okay, we need to..." She was cut off by a sound that made us both freeze. From the cockpit, 3 sharp alarm chimes. The signal for flight attendants to prepare for emergency landing. But we were 40 minutes from Anchorage. There was no reason for an emergency landing, unless something was very, very wrong. Rita ran to the cockpit door and picked up the crew phone. I saw her face go even paler as she listened. She hung up and turned to me. "Captain Patterson says all our instruments just went dark. Navigation, communication, autopilot, everything. He is flying manually, but he does not know where we are. The stars are wrong. He says the stars are in the wrong positions." "That is impossible." "So is your voice coming through the intercom asking for help." She grabbed my shoulders. "Listen to me very carefully. Breaking Rule 4 has consequences. It opens something. A door, a connection. I do not really understand it. But it means the boundaries get thin. Which means the other rules are going to be harder to follow. Things are going to try to make us break them. Do you understand?" Before I could answer, the temperature in the cabin plummeted. Not the gradual decrease I had experienced before. This was instant, violent, like someone had opened a door to the Arctic. Frost began forming on the windows, spreading in crystalline patterns that looked almost like reaching hands. Rule 7. If you notice frost forming on the cabin windows while flying over the ocean, close all window shades immediately and do not allow passengers to open them until sunrise. But we were not flying over the ocean. We were over land, over the wilderness of British Columbia. The rule should not apply, but the frost was forming anyway. Crawling across every window in the aircraft and through those frosted panes, I could see something that made my stomach drop. We were not over land. Outside the windows in every direction was water. Dark, endless water, stretching to a horizon that seemed too close. And in that water, shapes moved. Massive shapes breaking the surface, larger than any creature should be. "Close the shades!" Rita screamed, running down the aisle. "Close them all. Do not let the passengers see." We raced through the cabin, yanking down every window shade we could reach. Passengers were starting to wake up, confused by the sudden cold and commotion. I heard questions, complaints, but I ignored them all. Because through the last window before I could close its shade, I saw something that will haunt me until the day I die. One of the shapes in the water was rising. Rising impossibly high, water streaming off its dark surface. It was not a whale. It was not anything natural. It was a tower of frozen water, or a pillar of ice, or maybe just pure darkness given form. And at its top, pressed against the surface like a person trapped under ice, was a face. My face screaming silently. I yanked the shade down and stepped back, my legs nearly giving out. Rita caught me. "Do not look," she said. "Whatever you saw, do not think about it. We need to keep this flight together until sunrise. That is only..." She checked her watch. 53 minutes. We can do this. But the aircraft had other ideas. The cargo hold started up again, the thumping louder than ever. So loud that passengers were definitely noticing now, looking around in alarm. It was not 2 a.m. anymore. It was past 4 a.m. The rule should not apply, but it was happening anyway. And then, worst of all, I saw movement in seat 13F. The figure was back, still facing away, long black hair hanging down. But now, slowly, impossibly slowly, they were turning their head, turning to look at me. Rule 2, do not acknowledge them. But how do you not acknowledge something that is acknowledging you? How do you ignore something that is demanding to be seen? I forced myself to look away, to focus on anything else. Rita was trying to calm passengers, explaining away the cold as a temporary malfunction with the heating system, the sounds as minor mechanical issues. Her voice was steady, professional, but I could see the fear in her eyes. The figure in 13F continued to turn. I could see it in my peripheral vision, that slow, deliberate rotation. In seconds, they would be facing me completely, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that if I saw their face, something terrible would happen. Something worse than anything I had experienced so far. The knocking started beneath the galley floor. Loud, insistent, angry, boom, 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 but I had already placed a cup of water. I had followed Rule 8. Why was it happening again? Unless the rules were not working anymore. Unless breaking Rule 4 had broken all of them. A passenger in row 7 pressed his call button. An older man, business traveler, annoyed expression. Rita moved to help him, but I saw what he was holding. An empty glass. "Excuse me," he said loudly. "I would like another whiskey." Rita glanced at her watch. It was 4:18 a.m., still before dawn. Rule 6 was still in effect. "I am very sorry, sir," she said with her professional smile. "Refreshment service will resume at dawn." "That is ridiculous," he snapped. "I paid for this ticket. I want a drink now." "I apologize for the inconvenience, but listen, lady." He stood up, and I saw several other passengers in row 7 were awake now, watching. "I am a platinum member. I fly this airline every week, and I'm telling you to get me a damn drink." Rita's smile never wavered, but I saw her hand trembling slightly as she maintained her composure. "Sir, I truly cannot serve beverages in row 7 until dawn. However, if you would like to move to another seat, I would be happy to. I am not moving anywhere." His voice rose, attracting more attention. Other passengers were waking up now, looking toward the commotion. "What kind of stupid rule is that?" "You know what? Forget it. I will get it myself." He pushed past Rita toward the galley. I moved to intercept him, but he was already at the beverage cart, reaching for a bottle of whiskey. "Sir, please," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "We cannot serve you right now, but in just a few minutes. Kid, get out of my way." He grabbed the bottle and turned back toward his seat. Rita and I exchanged a panicked glance. He was going to drink it. He was going to drink something while sitting in row 7 after midnight before dawn. He was going to break Rule 6, and we were going to have to watch what happened. The man sat down heavily in his seat, unscrewed the cap, and raised the bottle to his lips. Every instinct screamed at me to stop him, to physically prevent him from drinking. But the rules were clear. Never serve drinks to anyone in row 7 after midnight. It said nothing about stopping them from serving themselves. Maybe that was the loophole. Maybe if we did not serve it, the rule would not be broken. I held on to that hope for exactly 3 seconds. The man took a long drink, swallowed, lowered the bottle with a satisfied smirk. "See, nothing to—" He never finished the sentence. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened in a silent scream, and then he began to choke. But nothing was in his throat. The whiskey had gone down, yet he was choking anyway, his hands clawing at his neck, his face turning purple. The other passengers in row 7 scrambled away from him, pressing against the windows, shouting for help. Rita and I rushed forward, but before we could reach him, he collapsed into his seat. His body went rigid, back arching unnaturally, and then from his mouth something began to emerge. Water. Not the whiskey he had drunk, but water. Dark, brackish water, pouring from his mouth and nose in impossible quantities. More water than a human body could possibly hold, streaming out of him, flooding across the seats and into the aisle. The water was freezing cold. I could feel it soaking through my shoes, numbing my feet. And in that water, I saw things moving. Small shapes darting just below the surface, too fast to identify. The man stopped convulsing. His body went limp, his eyes staring at nothing. And the water kept coming, kept pouring, until row 7 was ankle-deep in dark, frigid seawater. Then it stopped. Just stopped, as if a tap had been turned off. The water that had already spilled began to drain away, seeping into cracks and seams in the aircraft floor, defying gravity, defying physics, defying everything I thought I knew about reality. Within 30 seconds, it was gone. The man sat in his seat, soaked but otherwise normal-looking, except he was not breathing. His chest did not rise or fall. His eyes did not blink. Rita checked his pulse. Nothing. She looked at me, her expression grim. "Get the AED. We need to document this as a medical emergency." "Natural causes." "Natural causes?" I whispered. "Rita, that was not natural causes," she repeated firmly. "Heart attack, most likely. Tragic, but not uncommon on overnight flights. We did everything we could. Do you understand, Henry? We did everything we could." I understood. We were going to lie. We were going to fill out paperwork saying this man died of a heart attack, and no one would question it, because the alternative, telling the truth, was impossible. Who would believe it? And more importantly, who would want to? While Rita cordoned off row 7 and dealt with the shocked passengers, I returned to the galley, my mind reeling. A man had just died. Died because he broke a rule he did not know existed. Died because I had broken Rule 4 earlier, and somehow that had made everything worse. I looked down the aisle toward seat 13F. The figure had completed their turn. They were facing forward now, toward the front of the cabin. I still could not see their face, just the back of their head, that long black hair. But I knew they were smiling. Somehow I knew. The cockpit phone rang. Rita answered it, listened, and her face went even paler than before. She hung up and grabbed my arm, pulling me close. Patterson says we are approaching Anchorage, except the airport is not where it should be. He can see lights below a city, but his instruments say we are still 200 miles out. He is going to attempt a landing in 10 minutes. We need to prepare the cabin. How do we prepare for a landing when we do not know where we are? The same way we do everything else on these flights. We follow procedure and pray. We move through the cabin doing our emergency landing preparations. Securing loose items, making sure seat backs were upright, checking that everyone was buckled in. The passengers were frightened now, whispering among themselves, casting nervous glances at row 7 where a dead man sat waiting for a landing he would never experience. As I passed Seat 13F, I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead. Do not acknowledge them. Do not acknowledge them. The words repeated in my mind like a mantra, but I could feel their presence, feel their attention on me, like heat from a fire or cold from ice. I was 3 rows past 13F when I heard it, a voice soft and feminine coming from that seat. Henry, my name. They said my name. The rule said not to acknowledge them. It did not say they would not acknowledge me. Henry, look at me. Every muscle in my body tensed. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to look, to see who was calling my name. But I kept walking, kept moving forward, my feet mechanical, my breathing shallow. Henry, I know you can hear me. I know you want to look. Just a glance. Just one look. I have been waiting so long to show you. Rita was at the front of the cabin, securing the galley. She could not see me. Could not help me. I was alone with this voice, this impossible passenger, this thing that knew my name. Turn around, Henry. See what you have become. See what you will be. My foot stopped. My body, without permission from my mind, began to turn. I fought it. Tried to force myself forward, but it was like moving through concrete. The voice had weight, had gravity, was pulling me like a planet pulls a moon. That is it, just a little more. I want you to see. I was turning. Slowly, inevitably, I was turning towards Seat 13F. In seconds, I would see their face, and I knew with the certainty of absolute truth that if I saw that face, I would never leave this aircraft. I would become like them. Another passenger on a flight that never landed, trapped forever in the space between departure and arrival. Then I heard it. A different voice. Rita's voice cutting through the pull. Henry! Brace position, now. Her words broke the spell. I snapped forward, away from 13F, and grabbed the nearest seat back as the aircraft suddenly dropped. Not turbulence. A deliberate descent, sharp and fast. Captain Patterson was taking us down, whether he knew where down was or not. I fell into a jump seat and buckled in as the plane descended at an angle that was definitely not regulation. Through the windows, the ones without shades drawn, I caught glimpses of lights below. A city, but not quite right. The streets formed patterns that hurt to look at. Geometries that should not exist. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical grind that sounded almost like screaming. The aircraft shuddered, buffeted by winds that seemed to come from every direction at once. And then with a jolt that rattled my teeth, we touched down. The reverse thrusters engaged. The brakes squealed. We rolled down what I hoped was a runway, though I could not see anything through the windows now. Everything outside was darkness, absolute and complete. We rolled to a stop. The engines wound down, and for a moment there was perfect silence. Then Captain Patterson's voice came over the intercom, and I nearly laughed at the absurdity of his words. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Anchorage. The local time is 5:11 a.m. Please remain seated until the aircraft has come to a complete stop and the seatbelt sign has been turned off. On behalf of Northbound Airways, thank you for flying with us. The cabin lights came on full brightness and I looked around. Everything appeared normal. The passengers were gathering their belongings, complaining about the rough landing, acting like nothing strange had happened. Row 7 was empty except for the dead man, who would be dealt with by paramedics after everyone else deplaned. And seat 13F was empty, just a seat like any other, with that faded black tape over the number. But on the seat, where the impossible passenger had been sitting, there was something. A piece of paper folded neatly. I walked over, knowing I should not, unable to stop myself. I picked it up and unfolded it. In handwriting that looked exactly like mine, it said, "You cannot follow the rules forever, Henry. Eventually, you will break them all. And when you do, we will be waiting. We are always waiting." In seat 13F in the cargo hold, under the galley floor, in the static between words, "We are every flight you have ever taken, and every flight you ever will. We are the price of following rules you do not understand for money you do not need. See you on the next flight." I crumpled the paper and shoved it in my pocket. Rita was beside me, looking at the empty seat. "What did it say?" she asked quietly. "Nothing important," I lied. We deplaned with the passengers, smiling and thanking them for flying northbound airways, telling them we hope to see them again soon. The man from row 7 was removed discreetly by paramedics. The official report would say heart attack, natural causes, tragic but not unusual. Captain Patterson pulled me aside before we left the aircraft. His face looked like he had aged 10 years during the flight. "You broke one of the rules tonight," he said. It was not a question. How did you? "I have been flying these routes for 12 years, Henry. I know what happens when the rules get broken. I know what it looks like when reality starts to slip." He put a hand on my shoulder. "Listen to me very carefully. You get one mistake. One. If you break another rule, you do not come back. Not the way you went in. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Good." He released my shoulder. "Take a week off. Process what happened. Decide if you want to keep doing this. Because it does not get easier. It only gets stranger. And sooner or later, everyone breaks." He walked away, leaving me standing in the empty aircraft. The sun was rising outside, painting the interior in shades of gold and orange. Everything looked normal, safe, real. But I knew better now. I knew that reality was thinner than we pretend. That rules exist not because someone made them up, but because someone learned them the hard way. That there are worse things than debt and eviction and living paycheck to paycheck. I should have quit then. Captain Patterson had given me permission, given me an out. But as I walked through the Anchorage airport toward the crew lounge, I thought about my bank account, about the $2,500 I had earned in just 2 weeks, about how 2 more weeks would clear most of my student loans, about how 3 months would give me enough of a financial cushion to quit and never look back. 3 months. I could do 3 months. I had broken one rule and survived. I just had to make sure I never broke another one. How hard could that be? I was about to find out. The week off did not help. I spent it in my apartment, jumping at every strange sound, seeing shadows move in my peripheral vision, hearing whispers in the static between radio stations. I tried to convince myself it was just trauma, just stress, just my mind trying to process something it was not equipped to handle. But on the 3rd night, I woke up at 3 a.m. exactly to find water seeping under my bedroom door. Dark water, brackish and cold, pooling on my floor. I watched it spread, too paralyzed with fear to move until it stopped just inches from my bed. Then slowly it began to recede, flowing backward under the door, defying gravity, leaving no trace. When I checked the hallway, it was completely dry. No water, no dampness, no sign that anything had happened. But I knew it had. They were reminding me. They were letting me know that the aircraft was not the only place they could reach me. I returned to work the following Monday. Rita took one look at me and shook her head. "You are not sleeping," she said. "Are you?" She smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Not well. Not for years. That is the job, Henry. The pay is good because no one can do it for long without it destroying them. Then why do you keep coming back?" She was quiet for a moment, staring at nothing. Then she said, "Because I broke 2 rules. And they told me I could either keep flying, keep following the other rules perfectly, or I could quit and see what happens when they stop having a use for me." She looked at me with those haunted eyes. "At least here on these flights, the rules are clear. Out there in the normal world, I would not know what to watch for, would not know what to avoid. I would be vulnerable. Here I have structure. I have guidelines. I have a chance." I did not ask which rules she had broken. I did not want to know. My next flight was a different route, Seattle to Portland, just a short hop, barely 90 minutes. But it was a red-eye, and red-eyes on northbound airways were never simple. The crew was different too. A captain I had not met before, a woman named Torres, and a flight attendant named Mike who had been with the company for 6 years. 6 years. Longer than Rita. Longer than almost anyone I had met. He should have looked destroyed, should have had that same haunted expression, but he seemed almost comfortable, like he had found a way to make peace with the strangeness. During the pre-flight briefing, I asked him how he had lasted so long. The secret, he said, is to stop thinking of them as rules and start thinking of them as agreements. We agree not to look in certain places, not to do certain things, and in exchange they agree not to hurt us. Most of the time. It is a negotiation, not a restriction. But what are we negotiating with? He smiled. If you figure that out, Henry, let me know. I have been trying to understand for 6 years. The flight was uneventful until 1:30 a.m. when I went to check on the rear lavatory. The bolt lock was secure, the door closed. But as I walked past it, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Singing. Someone was singing inside the locked lavatory. A woman's voice, soft and sad, singing a song I almost recognized but could not quite place. The melody was beautiful and terrible at the same time, like something that belonged to a world that had forgotten joy. Rule 3, do not look inside, but it said nothing about listening. So I stood there frozen as the song continued, and slowly I began to recognize the words. It was a lullaby, one my mother used to sing to me when I was very small. A song I had not heard in 20 years, could not possibly remember clearly enough to reproduce. But this voice was singing it perfectly. Every word, every note, exactly as I remembered it. Then the voice changed. It was no longer a woman singing. It was my mother. I would recognize her voice anywhere, even though she had been dead for 3 years. Henry, she sang, working my name into the lullaby. Henry, my sweet boy. Let me out. Let me see you. It is so cold in here, Henry, so dark. Just open the door, just for a moment. My hand moved toward the bolt lock without my permission. I watched it rise, watched my fingers reach for the metal, watched myself prepare to break Rule 3. Mike appeared beside me and grabbed my wrist. His grip was iron, unyielding. Walk away, he said quietly. Right now, walk away. That is my mother, I whispered. She is in there. She needs help. That is not your mother. Your mother is gone. This is something else, something wearing her voice like a coat. Walk away. He dragged me back to the galley, his hand never loosening on my wrist. The singing continued for another minute, then stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow worse. Thank you, I managed to say. Rule 3 is the hardest one, Mike said, because it uses what we love against us. I have heard my daughter in there. Torres has heard her husband. Everyone hears something they cannot ignore. The trick is remembering that the people we love would never ask us to break the rules. They would want us to stay safe. For the rest of the flight, I stayed as far from that lavatory as possible. And I tried very hard not to think about my mother, cold and dark, trapped behind a locked door, calling my name. We landed in Portland at 3:07 a.m. without further incident. As I was preparing to disembark, Captain Torres stopped me. Mike told me what happened, she said. You almost broke Rule 3, but I did not. No, you did not. Because Mike was there. But what happens next time when he is not? What happens when you are alone and you hear that voice again? She studied my face. You are losing your grip, Henry, I can see it. One more close call and you are going to break another rule. And you cannot afford that. Captain Patterson said we get one mistake. Patterson is old school, merciful, I am not. Her expression hardened. You break another rule on my aircraft and I will ground you permanently. I do not care how short-staffed we are. I will not have crew members putting my plane at risk because they cannot handle the job. She walked away, leaving me with those words. I should have felt insulted, should have felt angry, but I just felt tired, bone-deep tired, the kind of exhaustion that sleep does not fix. I flew 8 more flights over the next 2 weeks. 8 flights where I followed every rule perfectly, where nothing went wrong, where I proved to myself and everyone else that I could do this job. My bank account grew. My debt shrank. I was making it work, but I was also falling apart. I stopped sleeping more than 2 or 3 hours a night. Every shadow looked like the figure from 13F. Every unexpected sound made me jump. I heard knocking beneath every floor, whispering in every silence. The world itself had become thin, translucent, like I could see through it to something darker underneath. Rita noticed. Mike noticed. Even passengers started asking if I was feeling all right, if I needed to sit down, if I wanted water. I told them all I was fine, just fighting off a cold, just dealing with the irregular schedule. But I was not fine. I was breaking. And the thing about breaking is that it happens gradually, then all at once. The all at once part came on Flight 417, Seattle to Anchorage, the route where I had broken Rule 4, the route where everything had started to fall apart. Rita was my partner again, and the moment she saw me, she knew. "You should not be flying tonight," she said. "I am fine. You are not fine. You look like you have not slept in days. Your hands are shaking. Your eyes." She trailed off, but I knew what she was seeing. The same thing I saw in the mirror every morning. Someone who had seen too much, someone who was losing their grip on reality. "I just need to get through tonight," I said. "After this, I am taking a few days off. I promise." She did not look convinced, but she did not argue. We boarded the passengers, went through the safety demonstration, pushed back from the gate. Everything was routine. Everything was normal. Until 2:30 a.m. when the thumping started in the cargo hold. Rule 1. Never open the cargo hold door between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. I knew the rule. I had followed it before. But tonight the thumping was different. Louder, more frantic. And beneath the mechanical booming, I heard something that changed everything. Screaming. Someone was screaming in the cargo hold. "Rita," I said, grabbing her arm. "Do you hear that?" She listened, her face grim. "I hear the thumping." Same as always. "No, listen, underneath, someone is screaming for help." She listened again, then shook her head. "Henry, there is no one in the cargo hold. Just luggage. It is just sounds. You know that." But I did not know that. Because the screaming was getting louder, more desperate, and it sounded exactly like someone I knew, someone I had not heard from in years. It sounded like my brother who had disappeared 5 years ago. My brother who had gone on a hiking trip and never came back. My brother who I had spent months searching for, who I had given up for dead, who I had grieved and mourned and tried to move on from. His voice was coming from the cargo hold, screaming my name, begging for help. "Henry, do not," Rita said, seeing my face. "Whatever you think you hear, it is not real. It is just them. They are trying to get you to break the rules. But what if it is real? What if he's really down there? What if I am the only one who can help him? Then he is already dead," Rita said bluntly. "Because nothing living could be in that cargo hold for this long. Nothing human. If you open that door, you will not save anyone. You will just join them." The screaming continued. I could hear my brother calling my name over and over, his voice raw with terror and pain. Every second I did not act felt like a betrayal. Every moment I followed the rules felt like I was killing him myself. But I remembered Captain Patterson's words. You get one mistake, one. I had already used mine. If I broke another rule, I walked to the rear of the aircraft, as far from the cargo hold access panel as I could get. I covered my ears, but I could still hear the screaming. I closed my eyes, but I could still see my brother's face in my mind, twisted in agony, pleading for help. The screaming lasted until 4:02 a.m. Then it stopped as suddenly as it had started. The cargo hold went silent, and I sat in the galley, my hands over my ears, tears streaming down my face, knowing that I had either saved myself or damned my brother all over again. Rita found me there. She did not say anything. She just sat beside me and put a hand on my shoulder, and we stayed like that until the plane began its descent into Anchorage. After we landed, after the passengers deplaned, after everything was secure and done, I walked to the cargo hold access panel. My hand hovered over the release handle. "Do not," Rita said behind me. "Please, Henry, do not." But I had to know. I had to see. I opened the panel and looked inside. The cargo hold was empty, just luggage neatly stacked and secured. Nothing alive, nothing dead, nothing that could have made those sounds or that voice. But lying on top of a suitcase, carefully placed where I would see it immediately, was a photograph. I picked it up with trembling hands. It was a picture of me and my brother, taken the day before he disappeared. We were standing at a trailhead, smiling, our whole lives ahead of us. On the back, written in handwriting that looked exactly like his, were 4 words. "I am still here." I showed Rita. She looked at the photo, then at me, and I saw genuine fear in her eyes for the first time. "This is bad," she whispered. "This is very, very bad." They have never left physical evidence before, never left something you can take with you, something that exists outside the flight. What does it mean? It means they are getting stronger, or you're getting weaker, or both.
She took the photo from my hands and stared at it.
Henry, you need to quit tonight, right now. Because whatever is happening, it is escalating, and I do not know how to stop it. Would you have stayed? Would you have walked away from the money, the mystery, the creeping horror that was slowly consuming your life? Comment below and let me know. And do not forget to subscribe. This story is not over yet. I should have listened to Rita. Should have turned in my wings right then and walked away. But I did not. Because somewhere between the fear and the exhaustion and the slow dissolution of my sanity, I had become obsessed. I needed to understand. I needed to know what we were really dealing with, what existed in that space between rules and reality. So I did something stupid. I started researching. The Northbound Airways building had a records room in the basement, a forgotten space filled with decades of files and reports. I went there on my day off, telling the security guard I needed to review some training materials. He barely looked up from his phone as he waved me through. The room smelled of old paper and mildew. File cabinets lined the walls labeled by year and route number. I started with Flight 417, going back 5 years, then 10, then 15. What I found made my blood run cold. Every year, multiple incidents. Crew members who quit suddenly, who transferred to day shifts, who disappeared entirely. Passengers who died of natural causes on overnight flights at rates far above the statistical norm. And accidents. So many accidents. Crashes, mechanical failures, planes that simply vanished over empty ocean or wilderness, never to be found. But the files that disturbed me most were the oldest ones. Reports from the 1970s when Northbound Airways first started operating. Back then there were no rules. The crew did what came naturally when strange things happened. They investigated sounds in the cargo hold. They talked to unexpected passengers. They opened locked doors. The incident reports from those early flights were nightmarish. Entire crews found dead in ways that made no sense. Passengers who arrived at their destinations but had no memory of the flight, or who arrived changed somehow, speaking in languages they had never learned, knowing things they should not know. And worst of all, planes that landed with more people than had boarded. One report, dated September 1974, caught my attention. Flight 4017, the same number as my route, had departed Seattle for Anchorage with 43 passengers and 4 crew members. It landed with 43 passengers, 4 crew members, and 11 additional people who had no tickets, no identification, and no explanation for how they had gotten on board. According to the report, these 11 extras were detained by airport security. But within hours, they had simply vanished. Not escaped, vanished, from locked holding cells with no windows and no way out. The security footage showed them sitting there one moment, then the footage glitched and they were gone. At the bottom of the report, someone had written in red ink, "Recommend discontinuing this route permanently." But the route had not been discontinued. It had been modified. And the next report, dated 6 months later, introduced the first version of the rules. Someone had figured out how to negotiate with whatever existed in that space. Someone had made a deal. Follow these rules and we can keep flying. Break them, and I photographed as many documents as I could, then left the records room before anyone could question what I was doing. I spent the next several days reviewing the photos, trying to piece together the pattern. And slowly a theory formed. The rules were not protecting us from something external. They were maintaining a barrier. Every overnight flight existed in 2 spaces simultaneously. The normal world and somewhere else. The rules kept those spaces separate. Break a rule and the barrier weakened. Break enough rules and the spaces merged completely. That was what had happened to me when I broke Rule 4. I had weakened the barrier, and now, whatever existed on the other side could reach through more easily. The photograph in the cargo hold, my mother's voice in the lavatory, my brother's screaming. They were all intrusions from that other space, that place where flights went but never truly left. The question was, what existed in that other place? And more importantly, what did it want? I got my answer on my final flight. It was late October, almost exactly a month since my first flight. I had survived longer than most, had followed the rules well enough to stay alive despite my one mistake. But I was falling apart. Everyone could see it. Rita begged me to take a leave of absence. Mike offered to trade shifts with me. Even Ms. Werner called me personally to suggest I consider a temporary transfer to day flights. But I was too close, too obsessed. I needed to understand. And some part of me, some deep irrational part, believed that if I could just figure out what was happening, I could save my brother, could pull him back from wherever he had gone. So I boarded Flight 417 one last time, Seattle to Anchorage, red-eye departure. Rita was my partner again and Captain Patterson was flying. They both looked at me like they were attending my funeral. The flight started normally. We boarded the passengers, went through the routine, took off into the darkness. But from the moment we reached cruising altitude, I knew this flight was different. The temperature dropped immediately. Not gradually like before, but all at once, frost forming on every surface. The passengers wrapped themselves in blankets, their breath misting, but no one seemed to think it was unusual, like they could not feel the cold or had forgotten what normal temperature felt like. At 1 a.m., the figure appeared in seat 13F. But this time they were not alone. Every empty seat on the aircraft was suddenly occupied. Silent figures, all facing forward, all perfectly still. Rita grabbed my arm. "Henry, how many passengers did we board?" "The 32. "Count them now." I counted. 67 people sat in the cabin. More than the aircraft could legally hold. More than physically possible given the boarding process. And every one of the extras sat in perfect stillness, not breathing, not moving, their faces hidden in shadow. "This is bad," Rita whispered. "I have never seen it like this before. It is like the barrier is completely gone." At 2 a.m. exactly, every single rule activated simultaneously. The cargo hold erupted with noise so loud it shook the entire aircraft. The intercom screamed with static and 1,000 voices speaking at once. The rear lavatory door rattled violently against its lock. Frost exploded across every window. Knocking echoed from beneath every floor panel. And all 67 passengers turned their heads in perfect synchronization to look at me. I saw their faces then, really saw them, and I understood. They were not passengers. They were crew members, flight attendants and pilots from Northbound Airways, from every year since the company started flying. Some wore uniforms from the 1970s, others from the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and their expressions were not hostile or evil. They were pleading. "Help us," they said in unison, their voices overlapping. "Help us land. Help us go home." Rita was frozen beside me, her face white. Captain Patterson's voice came over the intercom, but it was not his words. It was dozens of voices speaking through him. "We have been flying for years, decades, some of us centuries. We follow the rules. We always follow the rules. But we never land. Not really. We arrive, we depart, but we never leave. We are trapped in the space between, in the flight that never ends." The figure in 13F stood up, turned to face me fully, and I saw it was not my brother, not my mother, not anyone I knew. It was me, an older version, maybe 20 years older, wearing a Northbound Airways uniform. My face gaunt and haunted and utterly without hope. "You wanted to understand," my future self said. "So let me show you. Let me show you what Northbound Airways really is." The aircraft lurched and suddenly we were not moving through normal space anymore. The windows showed impossible things. Cities that existed in multiple time periods at once. Oceans that flowed upward into the sky. Mountains made of frozen lightning. And everywhere, aircraft. Hundreds of them. Thousands, all flying in perfect formation through a sky that was not sky. All trapped in eternal transit. "This is the flight," my older self said. Capital F. The flight that all other flights echo. The first flight that ever left and never arrived. Some say it started in the 1940s during the war. Others say it has always existed, that it is the shadow of human travel itself, the cost of trying to conquer the sky. He gestured to the other passengers, the phantom crew members. "We are all part of it now. Everyone who has ever flown for Northbound Airways eventually joins the flight, some sooner than others. Breaking the rules just accelerates the process. But even if you follow them perfectly, eventually you slip. Eventually you make a mistake. And then you are here." "No," I whispered. "No, there has to be a way out. There has to be a way to break the cycle." "There is," Rita said beside me. Her voice was different now, older, sadder. "There has always been a way, but it requires sacrifice." I turned to look at her and my heart sank. She was changing before my eyes, aging decades in seconds. Her uniform shifting through different eras, different designs. She had been part of the flight far longer than I had realized. The rules keep us in balance, she continued. They keep the flight stable, keep it from bleeding completely into the real world. But if someone were to break all 8 rules at once, deliberately and completely, it would create a rupture, a moment of instability where some of us could escape. Not all, never all, but some. At what cost? I asked, though I already knew the answer. At the cost of whoever breaks the rules, my future self said. They would become the anchor, the fixed point. They would take on the weight of the flight itself, become its permanent passenger so that others could land. I looked around the cabin, at the dozens of phantom crew members all watching me with desperate hope, at Rita, who had been trying to protect me while being trapped herself, at Captain Patterson in the cockpit, who had been flying this route for 12 years, slowly being consumed by it. And I thought about my brother, about how he had disappeared on a hiking trip. But what if that was not the truth? What if he had worked for Northbound Airways? What if he had been trying to break the cycle and had failed? My brother, I said to my older self. Is he here? Is he part of the flight? The older me nodded slowly. He tried to do what I am asking you to do, but he only broke 7 rules. He could not bring himself to break the 8th, so he became trapped just like the rest of us. But you are stronger. You have already broken 1 rule and survived. You understand the cost. You can finish what he started. The aircraft shuddered again, and I felt us beginning to descend. Through the impossible sky, I could see lights below. Anchorage. The real Anchorage. We were approaching the boundary between the flight and reality.
You have about 5 minutes to decide, Rita said.
When we touch down, everyone on this aircraft will disembark into the real world. But the flight will continue. It will recruit new crew members, new passengers. The cycle will repeat. Unless you stop it now. I walked down the aisle, past all the phantom passengers toward the rear of the aircraft. My mind was racing. 8 rules. I had to break all 8 rules, deliberately knowing what would happen. Rule 1, never open the cargo hold door between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. I grabbed the cargo hold access panel and yanked it open. The space beyond was not filled with luggage anymore. It was a void, a darkness so complete it seemed to absorb light itself. And in that darkness, shapes moved. The accumulated weight of every broken rule, every violation, every breach of the agreement that kept reality and the flight separate. Rule 2. Do not acknowledge the passenger in seat 13F. I walked up to my older self and looked him directly in the eyes. I see you, I said. I acknowledge you. You are real. His form flickered, became more solid. The acknowledgement gave him substance, made him more present in both realities at once. Rule 3. Do not look inside the rear lavatory. I unbolted the door and threw it open. Inside was not a bathroom. It was a corridor stretching back impossibly far, lined with doors. Behind each door I could hear voices. Screaming, crying, pleading. All the people who had ever been trapped in the spaces between flights. Rule 4. If the intercom activates on its own, respond only with, "Thank you for flying with us." I grabbed the handset as static erupted from the speakers. Dozens of voices spoke at once, begging, demanding, questioning. I took a breath and said, "I hear you. All of you. And I am going to set you free." The aircraft bucked violently and alarms began blaring in the cockpit. The barrier between realities was tearing, and I had just made it worse. Rule 5. If all passengers fall asleep and your watch stops, remain seated. I looked at my watch. The second hand was frozen. Every passenger in the cabin was motionless, suspended in that impossible moment. And instead of sitting, I ran. I ran through the cabin, touching each frozen passenger, each trapped crew member, trying to impart some of my momentum, some of my reality into them. Rule 6. Never serve drinks to anyone in row 7 after midnight. I grabbed bottles from the galley cart and poured drinks for every phantom passenger in row 7. The liquid hissed and steamed as it touched them, like water on hot metal, but they drank anyway, gasping as something like life returned to their forms. Rule 7. If frost forms on the windows over the ocean, close all shades immediately. I ran through the cabin, throwing open every window shade. The impossible landscape beyond poured in. That alien sky with its fleet of eternally flying aircraft. Some passengers cried out, covering their eyes. Others stared in recognition and despair. Rule 8. If you hear knocking beneath the galley floor, place water on the floor and walk away. I heard the knocking. Loud, insistent, desperate. And instead of placing water, instead of walking away, I did the one thing I was never supposed to do. I knelt down and pressed my ear against the floor. "I hear you," I said. "Tell me what you need." The knocking stopped. And then the floor opened. It did not crack or break, it simply ceased to exist, revealing a space beneath that should not be there. And from that space, figures began to climb. Not monsters, not demons, just people. Flight crew from decades past, their uniforms ancient, their faces filled with hope and terror in equal measure. The aircraft lurched violently, and I knew we were seconds from touchdown. The rupture I had created was spreading, threatening to tear the flight apart completely. Around me, the phantom passengers were changing, some becoming more solid, more real, others fading away entirely, finally released from their eternal transit. Rita grabbed my hand. "Henry, you have to anchor it. You have to become the fixed point, or the rupture will destroy everything. Both realities. Everyone on both sides." "How?" I shouted over the chaos, the alarms, the screaming of metal and reality tearing itself apart. "You have to choose to stay," my older self said, standing beside me. "Consciously, willingly. You have to accept the flight and become its permanent passenger. Its core. The point around which everything else orbits. It is the only way to stabilize what you have broken." I looked around the cabin, at the crew members climbing from beneath the floor, finally free. At the passengers who were solidifying, returning to reality. At Rita, who was already fading, her time in the real world running out as the flight tried to reclaim her. And I thought about my brother, about how he had tried and failed, about how he had been trapped in this impossible space for 5 years, about how I had spent those years grieving him, searching for him, never knowing he was right here, just one broken rule away. "If I do this," I said, "will they all be free? Everyone currently trapped in the flight?" "Yes," my older self said. "The rupture will release them. But new crew members will eventually be drawn in. The flight cannot exist without passengers. That is its nature. You will be buying them time, years maybe, before the cycle starts again. But it will start again. It always does." The wheels touched down. We were landing. In seconds, the doors would open and reality would reassert itself. I had to decide. Live free but doom everyone trapped in the flight to eternal transit, or sacrifice myself and give them a chance at escape. I closed my eyes and thought about my brother, about how he had tried to save others even when it cost him everything, about how the best parts of us show up in the hardest moments. "I will do it," I said. "Tell me what I need to do." My older self smiled, and for the first time he looked at peace. "You already did it. By breaking all 8 rules. By choosing to stay. That is all that was ever needed. Someone who understood the cost and paid it anyway." The aircraft stopped. The engines wound down. The cabin door opened and light poured in. Real light from a real airport in a real city. And the passengers began to move. They stood, gathered their belongings, and walked toward the exit. The phantom crew members followed them. Decades of trapped souls finally finding their way home. Rita squeezed my hand one last time, tears streaming down her face, and then she walked away too. Toward the light. Toward freedom. My older self watched them go, then turned to me. "I am you," he said. "From a timeline where you made a different choice, where you followed the rules perfectly, flew for 20 years, and slowly became part of the flight through attrition rather than sacrifice. This way is better. This way is choice." He began to fade, his purpose served, his timeline erased by my decision. The flight will be stable for a while, but eventually it will need passengers again. It is the nature of the thing. Maybe someone else will figure out how to truly end it, but you gave them time. You gave them a chance. That is all anyone can do. He disappeared and I was alone in the cabin, alone except for one figure still sitting in seat 13F. I walked over and looked down. My brother sat there, solid and real, looking exactly as he had 5 years ago. He looked up at me and smiled. "Hey, Henry," he said. "Took you long enough. You have been here the whole time?" "Yeah, trying to break the cycle, trying to save people. I got most of the way there, but I could not finish it. Could not make the final sacrifice." He stood and pulled me into a hug. "But you did. You actually did it. You crazy, stupid, brave idiot. You can leave now," I said. "You are free, go home." He pulled back and looked at me. "What about you?" "I am staying. Someone has to. Someone has to be the anchor point or the whole thing collapses. Then I am staying too." No. You have been here long enough. You have suffered enough. Go home, live, that is what I am buying with this. He shook his head.
You think I can just walk away?
Leave my little brother to an eternity in limbo? Not happening. We are in this together. Before I could argue, the cabin door closed. Not slowly, but all at once, sealing us in. The lights flickered and stabilized at their eternal twilight setting. And through the windows, the normal sky faded away, replaced by that impossible expanse filled with aircraft. We were airborne again, though we had just landed. Departing, though we had just arrived. The flight had claimed us both, but something was different now. The cabin felt quieter, more peaceful, like the chaos and desperation that had defined it before had been replaced by something calmer. What happens now, I asked. My brother walked to the galley and started making coffee, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Now we wait. We are the anchor points, the stable core. As long as we are here, the flight stays balanced. Contained, it cannot bleed into the real world, and the people trapped here can eventually find their way out. Forever? Maybe. Or maybe someone smarter than us will figure out how to actually end this thing. In the meantime, we make the best of it. He handed me a cup of coffee. Look at it this way. We are together. We have an infinite supply of terrible airplane coffee, and we never have to worry about rent again. Despite everything, I laughed. It was absurd. All of it was absurd. But it was also strangely okay. I had found my brother. I had saved dozens, maybe hundreds of trapped souls, and I had done it by choice, not by accident. The flight continued, as it always had and always would. But now it had caretakers, anchors, people who understood the cost and paid it willingly. Captain Patterson's voice came over the intercom, but it was not him anymore. It was the voice of the flight itself, ancient and tired and grateful. Thank you, it said, for understanding, for choosing. The rules will remain for those who come after. They will protect new crew members from being consumed too quickly. But you are beyond the rules now. You are part of the structure itself. The intercom clicked off. My brother and I stood in the galley drinking terrible coffee, watching through the windows as other aircraft passed by in the impossible sky. Some of them had lights on in their cabins, other anchors, other people who had made the same choice we had. You know what the weirdest part is? My brother said after a long silence. What? I am not scared anymore. For the first time in 5 years, I am not terrified. It is like, now that I understand what I am, what this is, it does not have power over me anymore. I understood what he meant. The fear had been the not knowing, the uncertainty, the sense that reality could betray you at any moment. But now we were on the other side of that betrayal. We had seen the worst, understood it, and chosen to face it anyway. So what do? I asked.
Just fly forever?
We keep the flight stable. We watch for new crew members who are struggling. We try to guide them toward the exit before they get trapped. We become what I wish someone had been for me. He paused. And we hope that someday someone figures out how to end this for good. The aircraft banked, beginning another eternal circuit. Through the windows, I could see the real world below, distant but visible. Seattle's lights, Portland's streets, Anchorage's mountains. All still there. All still accessible to those not trapped in the flight. Somewhere down there, Rita was free. The crew members who had climbed from beneath the floor were reuniting with families who thought they were dead. Ms. Werner was probably already recruiting new people, because Northbound Airways needed flight crews and would always need flight crews. And up here, my brother and I flew on. Not prisoners, not victims, but guardians. Anchors in a storm that would never fully end. I walked to seat 13F and sat down, finally able to occupy the space that had terrified me for so long. My brother sat beside me in 13E, and together we watched the impossible sky, the eternal flight, the space between departure and arrival, where rules tried to keep reality from tearing itself apart. You know what I think? My brother said after a while. What? I think the flight is not a punishment. I think it is a warning about what happens when we try to cheat distance, when we try to compress travel into something instant and easy. There is always a cost, always something in between. The flight is just that cost made visible. That is very philosophical for someone drinking airplane coffee at 3 in the morning. 3 in the morning forever, he corrected with a grin. Might as well get philosophical. We sat in comfortable silence after that. Two brothers reunited in the strangest way possible, in a place that should not exist, doing a job no one should have to do. But somehow, impossibly, it felt right. The rules had kept me alive long enough to understand them. Breaking them had set dozens of people free. And accepting the consequences had given me something I thought I had lost forever: my brother and a purpose. If you are listening to this, if you are watching this story unfold, know that the flight is still up there, still carrying its anchors, still bound by its rules. And every time you board a red-eye flight, every time you travel through that strange liminal space between night and day, you are passing close to us. Most of you will never know. Most of you will land safely, none the wiser. But a few of you, the ones who notice things that do not quite add up, the ones who see shadows that should not exist, the ones who hear voices in the static, you are closer to the flight than you think. And if you ever find yourself being offered a job with an airline you have never heard of, with pay that seems too good to be true, with rules that make no sense, think very carefully before you accept, because the flight is always looking for new passengers, always needing new crew, always existing in that space between departure and arrival, between the known and the impossible. My name is Henry. I am 24 years old, and I am a flight attendant for Northbound Airways. I will be for the rest of eternity, but I made my choice. I saved my brother. I freed dozens of trapped souls, and I gave the next crew members a little more time, a little more protection, a little more hope. The rules exist for a reason. They keep you safe. They keep the flight contained. Follow them and you might survive your time in the sky. Break them, and you might just find yourself sitting in seat 13F watching the impossible stars, waiting for the landing that never comes. Thank you for flying with us.